Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching, whenever you get to listen to this YouTube channel. I am Nisanka from Coaching with Nisanka, and I've got Amanda, as always, with me, lovely Amanda, who is a high conflict divorce coach. And go on,
Sorry,
Amanda,
I'm just
correct.
going to interject because I help women predominantly, but navigating through breakups and divorce, not just divorce, but
Okay.
they're separating basically from, I'd say, high conflict personalities, narcissistic or toxic.
Yeah. Brilliant. And that's why we're here together, because I help parents who co-parent with narcissistic partners or ex-partners and high conflict, toxic personalities. And today's topic is one that's really interesting. So you might want to stick with this for a bit until the end of this session, because we're going to explore different angles. And this is a question that both of us get in our work quite often. Will the narcissist change at some point, or will they get better at some point? It's something that people ask in many different forms. Will things improve? Will my life improve? Whatever the way the question comes, the essence of it is, will this person change? Will the narcissistic toxic person change? Amanda, I'll start with you.
So statistically, and if you look at all the research, it would indicate that it's highly unlikely that someone very narcissistic or has NPD especially is going to be able to change. First of all, they very rarely submit themselves for therapy unless they've been given an ultimatum, perhaps by a family member or their partner. So, and as we all know, unless you have that internal desire to change and you really are able to self-reflect and you want to make those changes on a very deep, profound level, you're not going to make the effort. So oftentimes a narcissist will submit themselves to therapy just to get their partner back or to stay in the relationship. So once they start the therapy, then they stop soon after when the partner has returned. So it's very rare that they actually undergo long-term therapy. And if they do, which I think I read, it's like in 1% of cases that there are actual changes, it's because they are committed to it for 10 years plus. So it's a really important question to ask oneself. Am I willing to put myself on the line to be in this very difficult situation for such a long time with potentially very little reward? At the end of the day, the other person may change minimally, but apparently relationally they don't change substantially. It's just that certain abusive type behaviors will be minimized.
Yeah. And you've talked about really important things. I think it's important to look at what is required in order for a person to change. In order for anybody to change, any individual to change, there are certain things that we require. One is self-reflection. Second is willingness to change, volunteering to change. And third is willingness and committing to taking consistent actions regularly. And then fourth is to actually become self-aware of things when things don't go well, and then be able to accept the pitfalls of any of this process. And those four steps are essential for anybody's behavior to change, and which is why I often talk about, like, when you apply behavior management strategies for children, often they fail. You end up conditioning children because these four components are not there in those. There's force and there's compliance, but there is no voluntary actions there. And for a narcissistic person, self-reflection does not exist. It doesn't exist. Now, there's research to say it's because they've been through trauma as children themselves. Of course, we can have some empathy, and we need to have a conversation, a different conversation about whether this empathy is rewarding us or whether it's keeping us trapped. That's a different conversation. But going back to the original conversation, the narcissistic people have been through trauma themselves, and they have unprocessed trauma, and that has to a certain degree damaged their brains, the neural networks. And in a way, you can say the brain has shrunk, so they lack the ability to self-reflect. And also there's environmental factors why the narcissistic people remain narcissistic. Like you can see these patterns emerging amongst children as young as 9-10 years old. You can see these patterns emerging. But when the parents themselves don't challenge the children, don't hold the children accountable, and they, like a golden child, who can do no wrong, who is, whose ego gets inflated from a start. You're amazing. You can't do wrong. Everybody else's problem. When the parents have this bit of tiger parenting towards, children, and they are in denial that their little children, golden child, can do wrong. So that's an environmental factor, because then what happens is that their behavior gets conditioned from a very young age to get what they want, right? Because they're not held responsible, held accountable. And when somebody else holds accountable, the parents tend to intervene and push the other people who would hold them accountable away, in order. The parents think they're protecting their children, but they're not. So when these children grow up, they tend to be narcissistic. So as a habit, from a very young age, they have learned to get or be the spotlight, get what they want at a cost of relationships and friendships and everything. But they're quite happy because they get what they want, and that's the way they've been conditioned. So if you think about a person like that ever having to change, when actually world is at their feet serving them, and these people have no empathy or lack of empathy in most cases, that they're not going to change because it's working for them.
Yeah,
it's working for them. World is at their feet. I mean, if you look at the politicians, if you look at some of the leadership roles that the world is at their feet. They get what they want done by highway, or what do you call it, my way or highway. They get it done. So they're unlikely to change. And is it add to that, Amanda?
no, I was going to add the lack of empathy piece, but you touched on it just then. And actually they say, research says that the empathy center of the brain is actually smaller, so physiologically they actually have a lack.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that,
so it's physiologically, they cannot, because that's not there. It's a bit like, if you think about something, how can I put it across in a way? If you at some point lose your sight for some reason, that's a physiological change, right? Unless something happens, operation, some work's done, then you're not going to get that sight just because you want to, or just because somebody else prays for you. It's a bit like that when something is damaged physiologically, and we can grow them back, but these people are not, again, taking part in it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no changing that. You can't increase the empathy center in their brains. So, and when they don't have that incentive, for example, if the partner says, go and get therapy, go make these changes, if they don't really care, they don't have that empathy piece, then they're not going to have that incentive to want to put in the hard work to change.
Absolutely. And also, often narcissistic people think everything happens to them is everybody else's fault. So if partner says to you, you've been cheating on me, please go get therapy and I'll help you. It doesn't matter how empathetic you are and how understanding you are, go get yourself help. And then they will find a way to attack and reverse that victimhood and then just say, you've not been sleeping with me, you've not been available to me, you've not been doing this to me, that's why I went and cheated on you. It's not my fault that I cheated, you put me in this situation. So there is that whole, like attacking and blame shifting and being the victim. And then what usually the empathetic partner would do is, I know, I'll try my best, they'll then give up their life to accommodate them. But a few months down the line, it's just repetitive behavior again and again and again, and this time they'll tend to hide it better. That's the only thing that will change, is that they'll find a way not to be caught this time. And so the research, and I mean, if you can tell me, or if you can recognize anybody who has changed, a narcissistic person who has changed in their lives, we would like to hear, how has your life changed because the other person has changed. There's some change in them, but it's often manufactured. If they want something, they'll make it look like they're changing.
And and I was going to say, you kind of read my mind, because there can be that cognitive empathy, which is quite dangerous, because if you don't know the difference between, for example, compassionate type empathy and cognitive empathy, which is basically you can mimic how other people do empathy, but you're not actually feeling what the other person is feeling. You can't walk in that person's shoes per se. So they can engineer this empathy so it may look quite convincing. So it's like, okay, maybe they really are going to change, and maybe they will do this, and maybe it's actually, and then you get carried away. But then ultimately, as I said before, I would say in most circumstances, you will be let down, because, again, going back to what we've said, they just can't, in most cases, keep that going. It's a means to an end, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've just touched on something that's really important. There's this hope within us, and we've all been through narcissistic relationships, and I'm sure you can relate to what I'm just about to say. We live in the hope that one day they will change. We live in the curiosity that if we do something like this, that one day they will change. And also, we have been conditioned religiously, culturally, socially as well, that, don't throw the towel away, be patient, and patience is a virtue, and every marriage is like that, or it is what it is, it's life,
or in sickness and in health,
in sickness and in health, all of these things. Of course, in sickness and in health, that's fine. In abuse that is perpetuated by the perpetrator, and I'm using these words very carefully because these are abuse, this behavior is abuse, and it's perpetuated by the person intentionally in order to gain control over you, so that they get served one way or the other. So it's a very calculated, it's a very thought through process. It's not an accidentally somebody going, I'm so angry. It's not like that. It's calculated. It's done on purpose. And in abuse, there's absolutely no reason for you to stay, and then people do stay because we live in our story. When we fall in love with somebody, right? When we fall in love with somebody, and when we dream of all of these things, like, having a family, having all these amazing things, having a future, right? We want to keep this story going somehow. So what often we end up doing is we end up sacrificing our own health, our own well-being, our own ambitions, and our own capacities and potential in order to keep this story going. So you will end up protecting the abuser in the marriage or in the relationship in order to keep this story going, because accepting this, and in many ways we're in denial, if, you know, when we let the abuse takes place and when we're not doing anything about it, part of us, we're in denial. Part of another reason is that the trauma bond, which we'll talk about in a minute, and also the cultural and religious reasons. Sometimes it doesn't matter whether you've accepted this is abuse, you want to do something about this, but culturally and socially, these people are so restricted. And when they get out of a relationship like that, they often get punished, sometimes even legally in certain parts of the world, that they don't have a choice. So they would rather stay and being abused because what they see as freedom doesn't exist outside of that relationship to them anymore. So it's complicated why we keep these relationships going and not doing something. It's easy for us to coaches to sit here and say, or therapists to sit here and say, you can make it happen if you want to. But I think if realistically speaking, and I'm really against people who use such language, it is you. Part of it is true, right? Part of it is very unempathetic, in my view.
Yeah.
Because we're in situations sometimes that we, as much as we want to have control, right? And we do know the control, we do know the solutions. If we take that, there's going to be worse consequences for us. So we choose what's in that situation, what's better for us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I know that there's quite a few posts on this on social media and whatever, but to tell someone, you know, who's expressed that they're in a difficult relationship and there's abuse and etc., and then they say something really unhelpful and unempathetic, essentially, maybe with good intention, but saying, well, why don't you just leave? There's so much more to it.
Absolutely. There's more to it. Financial reasons, like I said, cultural reasons, and also your own trauma bond. You know, like you feeling attached, this increasing attachment to the person who's abusing you. Because if often the abuse in narcissistic abuse, it comes with better treatment. They abuse you emotionally or even sometimes physically and sexually in certain cases. And then there's this sweet apology, and then there's the flowers, and there's the chocolates, there's the dates, and there's the picnics, and there's the holidays, and all of these beautiful things that happens after that. And then you're suddenly, oh, it's not as bad after all, or she's not as bad after all. I might have done something really wrong to make this happen. So you kind of internalize the blame, and then the power increases, because then what you're doing to yourself is, well, we've all been through this. I've done this myself, and I'm sure you have as well. And then we go, oh no, something's, I'm going to change. I'm going to change, and you serve more, and the power increases. There's the power imbalance, and there's the abuse continues, and then there's the sweet apology, and then there's the power increase. It just goes deeper and deeper and deeper, spiraling. It just takes you into a place where when you look back up few years later, you're deeper in the dump. And then we think, oh, we've invested so much time and money and energy into this relationship. I'm going to somehow make this work.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on something. You mean that cyclical nature and the intermittent reinforcement makes it so hard to leave. So that's when you have the good moments interspersed between the abuse. I mean, there's so much we could talk about, but it's again, on a physiological level, it's very addictive. These highs and lows, it's like a slot machine. The fact that you never know when that win is coming through makes it highly addictive.
It is. We are by nature curious people. We are by nature addicted to hope. You know, we like hope. And there's obviously a chemical process in this as well. You know, there's a chemical process. And then you just, I read somewhere that in narcissistic relationships, sex can be so addictive. And we often, one thing that I hear this as well, and we think, oh my God, sex was amazing in that relationship. When I read deeper into this research, I was like, oh my God, it really makes sense, because you're constantly in tension, in anxiety. When sex takes place, when sex eventually happens, it's a release. It's a release of high level of dopamine. And then you get dopamine is an addictive, is it a hormone, isn't it?
Yeah.
Addictive, it's a hormone. I don't want to say the wrong thing, but it slipped my mind. It's addictive, right? A release of dopamine, chocolate, sex, it all addicts you, to
And
it.
especially if there's a somatic narcissist in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And your whole body just remembers that experience and wanting it more. So that the cycle goes on and on and on and on. You get addicted to that tiny bit of dopamine, just like you get addicted to the good moment of a holiday or a picnic or something. You get addicted, and then there's the release again. And then you live in tension, walk on eggshells, and there's so much anxiety, and then the sex happens, and then and there's the release again. So you're so addicted to this cycle happening over again. I think the bottom line is there is this radical acceptance that we have got to make, that this person will never change. Because when you make that acceptance, and I've been speaking to certain clients that who takes months and months working with me even to admit this person is a narcissistic person. Still, right? The pattern is there, the questionnaire is clear, answers are clear. But Sigo, I really don't want to call him a narcissist. I don't think he's a narcissist. You're still doubting yourself, because that's that denial that you have been abused, because the more you live in denial, the more you don't have to face the pain and the grief of the abuse that went in your life. And that's really hard to accept.
Yeah, and kind of accepting that this person that you fell madly and deeply in love with never truly existed.
Yes.
It's a really harsh realization.
It's so painful. It's a knife in your heart. This person that you opened up to, you started trusting, you actually fell in love with, like you said, never existed. That love that we felt, it just wasn't love. It just wasn't love.
Yeah. It's just
right?
was a reflection of the love you were giving to them. The high of the supply that they're receiving is reflected. So.
Absolutely. That's why often I've done another chat with my best friend, one of my good friends, Alan Watts, who's a conscious dating coach, and we talked about early on, how do you deflect narcissistic people? Know yourself, and then put boundaries in place right from the start. They'll pretend to be okay with it, but within a week or two, they get very contemptuous and they get very angry, and then they try to change it. You don't change it, they walk away, they leave you alone, because they know they're not going to get the supply from you. So yeah, and it really does come down to you radically accepting this person is never going to change, and actually questioning and self-reflecting, what is it making me stay in denial, not wanting to accept that this person is actually being abusive towards me? What would you lose if what would you lose if you accept it, right? That's that you've got to be able to accept those steps, the painful steps, in order for us to be able to move on, or move forward rather, and learn the lessons from it.
And I would just quickly say something else, that oftentimes it's, thinking, well, I need to stay for the sake of the children and I don't want to disrupt things and all that. But I would say oftentimes it's for the sake of the children that it can be really a healthy choice to go, because obviously they're witnessing, a relationship which is highly unhealthy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and on that point, I mean, we're just about to wrap this conversation up, but on that point, I'm going to share something very personal. So I grew up with two very narcissistic, very toxic people, and and they have their own reasons. I have empathy towards these two people who brought me up, or who gave birth to me and raised me and gave me an education. I absolutely have empathy. But it took me years and years and years and years of work to release the trauma, and then I'm still working on it. One of the things that often I was told was, I am in it. So it came from both sides. I am in it because of you, because of you. But as a child, the message I got from that was, oh, I am the reason for all of this. It's my fault that this is all happening. It's my fault that my parents are not happy, or fighting all the time, or beating each other up all the time, or whatever it is. It's my fault. So I grew up believing everything that was happening around me, the abuse that took place, the domestic violence that took place around me, it was my fault. You've got to understand, when we use general terms like, I'm doing this for the sake of the children, there are worse consequences for general statements like that. So you might justify yourself thinking, yeah, I am doing it. But, with compassion to yourself, ask the question, and with compassion to yourself, and this is not guilt tripping you at all. With compassion to yourself, ask yourself, whatever happens around you, when the children can't make sense of what's going on in their lives, when the children don't feel the empathy and the calmness and the love in their environment, and when that's not their experience, they walk away with one belief, and that is, I'm not enough and this is my fault, right? And you've got to understand, so you may be making these decisions because in your rational mind as an adult, this is better for the children, but children are still walking away with, this is my fault. So how do you break these patterns so that the children are looked after and loved and given the healthy attachment and the healthy love that they deserve, so they have a stress-free environment to grow up in? That's the environment that they will thrive. It's not the best schools that will thrive, that will enable children to thrive. It's the stress-free environment that will enable children to thrive. So we have a lot more things to think about when we raise children in this world and co-parents. I'm just talking about in my context. I think we've kind of come to an end of the conversation. Amanda, is there anything you want to share?
No, I think what you just said was very beautifully put, and I agree 100%. And I think that's all. I think we've covered most things. I would just say quickly that if you would like to get in touch with me, you can email me. My email address is amanda@amandahale, and that's HALE.co.uk. And Nisanka.
Brilliant. And yeah, you can get in touch with me. I mean, you can see the website there, www.coachingwithnisanka.com. I've actually got an upcoming workshop on how to ungaslight your children. It's just pay what you can. So it's like, even if it's £1 that you can afford, then just put it in and then register. And we can learn about how to gaslight our children that takes place in their situation. So that's it from me and Amanda today. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've learned something today. And if there's any reflective thoughts and feedback you would like to share, any areas that you would like us to cover, just let us know. Get in touch. Thank you very much. Take care.